A lot of buying from central banks being part of that, a big part of that, all of last year, something like 27 tons on average every month in 2025.
Now, recently, a lot of the central banks in the world have been buying gold. In fact, they've been buying more gold now in the last 12 months than probably any time since the early 70s.
I think that central banks will continue to be buyers.
The gold typically where investors go to for a safe haven, but right now that's not the case.
You buy on mystery and you sell on history.
Welcome to Gold Report. This is the investigation into why every major central bank in the world is quietly, systematically, and in many cases, secretly accumulating gold at a pace that has no modern precedent, and what it means for the price of gold and the savings of ordinary people. To understand why this is happening, you need to understand what central banks actually are and why what they do with their reserves matters more than almost anything else in the global financial system. A central bank is the institution that manages a country's money. It holds that country's reserves, the financial assets that back up the national currency and give it credibility. For most of the 20th century, those reserves were held primarily in US dollars and US Treasury bonds. Gold was considered old-fashioned, outdated, something from a different era. Central banks in Western Europe sold hundreds of tons of gold every year through the 1990s and early 2000s. The message from the financial establishment was clear: gold is a relic, the future is in currencies and bonds. Then something changed. In 2010, after the global financial crisis, central banks quietly became net buyers of gold for the first time in decades. They have not stopped buying since. That was 15 consecutive years of net purchases as of 2024. 15 years without a single year of net selling. And the pace of buying has not just continued, it has accelerated dramatically. Between 2010 and 2021, central banks bought an average of 473 tons of gold per year. In 2022, they bought 1,136 tons, the highest annual total since 1967. In 2023, they bought 1,050 tons. In 2024, they bought 1,045 tons. Purchases over the 3 years from 2022 to 2024 were 104% higher than purchases over the entire previous 3-year period from 2014 to 2016. They literally doubled the pace. According to IMF data, global central bank gold holdings now stand at approximately 36,200 tons. Gold now accounts for nearly 20% of total official global reserves, up from around 15% at the end of 2023. That jump, 5 percentage points in a single year, is one of the largest annual shifts in the composition of global reserves in modern history. Gold surpassed US Treasury bonds to become the second largest global reserve asset at market prices in 2024. Let that land. The asset that the financial establishment called a relic 30 years ago is now the second most important reserve asset on Earth, behind only the US dollar itself. And yet, despite all of this, and despite the scale, despite the acceleration, despite the historic nature of what is happening, the vast majority of this buying is happening quietly. A 2025 survey of central banks by the World Gold Council found that 95% of central banks plan to expand their gold reserves over the coming year. 95%. That is not a trend. That is a near-universal institutional decision. And the World Gold Council noted something that reveals just how much is happening beneath the surface. When in the third quarter of 2025, 66% of central bank demand was unreported. 2/3 of the buying was not disclosed to the IMF, not announced, not on any official ledger, simply happening in the background quietly and deliberately. The question that matters is why. Why are the institutions that run the world's monetary system, the same institutions that told everyone for decades that gold was irrelevant, buying it at the fastest pace in 60 years? And why are so many of them doing it in secret? To answer that, you need to understand what happened in February 2022, the moment that changed the calculation for every central bank on Earth. When Western nations froze approximately $650 billion of Russian foreign exchange reserves in response to the invasion of Ukraine, something fundamental shifted in how financial institutions around the world thought about the safety of their assets. For decades, the standard operating procedure for any country accumulating reserves was simple: buy U.S. dollars, buy U.S. Treasury bonds, store them in Western financial institutions, primarily the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and the Bank of England. This was considered the safest thing any country could do with its money. February 2022 proved that this assumption was wrong. Nearly half of Russia's total reserves, assets that Russia had accumulated over decades and believed were held in safe, neutral custody, were frozen overnight. Not seized, not destroyed, simply made inaccessible. A central bank that had spent years building up its financial cushion found that cushion could vanish with a phone call between allied finance ministers. The message to every other central bank watching was impossible to ignore. Dollar reserves and treasury bonds held in Western institutions carry a risk that nobody had priced before. They can be frozen, they can be weaponized. Gold cannot. Physical gold held in your own vaults in your own country cannot be frozen by anyone. It has no counterparty. It carries no political risk. Nobody can switch it off. A World Gold Council survey found that a substantial share of central banks cited concerns about potential sanctions as a direct factor in their decisions to increase gold holdings. One central bank official quoted anonymously in a Reuters report said it simply, "We had gold held in London. Yet we transferred it back to our country to hold as a safe haven asset and to keep it safe." That is not a financial calculation. That is a statement of distrust in the existing system. And it is coming not from fringe institutions, but from the official reserve managers of sovereign nations. This shift in thinking has produced a second major trend that runs alongside the buying itself. Central banks are not just accumulating gold, they are bringing it home. The repatriation of gold, moving reserves that were stored abroad, primarily in London and New York, back to domestic vaults, has accelerated sharply since 2022. By 2024, 68% of central banks said they plan to keep most of their gold within their own borders. In 2020, that figure was 50%. In 4 years, the preference for domestic storage jumped by 18 percentage points. India's story is one of the most striking examples of this shift. In 2024, the Reserve Bank of India repatriated 100 tons of gold from the Bank of England's vaults. Moving 100 tons of gold 4,000 miles required months of planning, specialized aircraft, and dedicated security operations. It was, by any measure, a massive logistical undertaking. And the Reserve Bank of India did it quietly. No public announcement, no press conference. The operation was only revealed when it appeared in the central bank's annual report. By the end of 2024, India had repatriated a total of 214 tons since September 2022. The country's domestic gold holdings now represent nearly 60% of its total reserves of approximately 855 tons. India is not alone. Poland, which was the single largest central bank buyer of gold in 2024, adding 90 tons in that year alone, has built new high-security vaults to store its expanding gold reserves domestically. The National Bank of Poland's governor has been openly vocal about his institution's gold strategy, stating that gold is free from credit risk and cannot be devalued by any country's economic policy. Poland now holds 497 tons of gold, representing 21% of its total reserves. Germany, Hungary, the Netherlands, and Turkey have all repatriated portions of their holdings over the past decade. The pattern is consistent across countries of different sizes, different economic systems, and different relationships with Western financial institutions. The consensus is the same: bring the gold home. But the country that dominates this entire story, the country whose gold buying has most dramatically reshaped the global market and whose real numbers remain perhaps the most significant financial mystery of the decade, is China. China's People's Bank officially reports its gold reserves to the International Monetary Fund. As of the end of 2024, the official figure was approximately 2,300 tons. That number makes China the sixth largest official gold holder in the world. But virtually nobody in the gold market believes that number is accurate. The real figure, according to multiple independent analyses, is dramatically higher. Société Générale, one of the world's major investment banks, told the Financial Times that China's real gold purchases in 2024 could total as much as 250 tons, more than 5 times what was officially declared. Goldman Sachs estimates that China is buying approximately 10 times more gold per month than it officially reports. An independent analyst, John Nieuwenhuis, who has tracked China's gold flows through customs data, UK export records, and industry intelligence, estimates that the People's Bank of China secretly bought 570 tons in 2024 alone, against the officially admitted figure of 44 tons. His analysis places China's total gold holdings at over 5,000 tons. If accurate, that would make China the second largest gold-holding nation on Earth, behind only the United States. How is this happening without being reported? The mechanics are actually traceable in the data, even if China does not disclose them. Large format 400-ounce gold bars, the standard format used by central banks, are primarily refined in Switzerland and South Africa, traded in London, and then shipped to their final destinations. UK customs data shows consistently elevated gold exports to China that are far larger than what China reports as incoming central bank purchases. The gap between what leaves London for China and what China admits to receiving is, according to analysts who track this data, enormous. The gold is going somewhere. And the most logical recipient, given the scale and the format of the bars, is the People's Bank of China. China's buying is closely connected to its broader strategy of reducing dependence on the US dollar in its reserve portfolio. Its official gold holdings still represent only around 6% of its total reserves, a fraction of the gold percentage held by the United States, which keeps 81% of its reserves in gold. If China were to bring its gold percentage anywhere close to that level, it would require purchasing thousands of additional tons. The buying, by this logic, is nowhere near finished. China has also taken a step that signals something even more ambitious. The People's Bank of China has been quietly approaching foreign central banks, particularly in Asia and the developing world, and offering to store their gold reserves in Chinese vaults rather than in London or New York. At least one Southeast Asian central bank has reportedly shown interest in this arrangement. Cambodia has already agreed to place newly purchased gold in the Shanghai Gold Exchange's vault in Shenzhen. The message China is sending is deliberate. If you no longer trust Western custody, we can be the alternative. The Bank of England currently holds approximately 400,000 gold bars in its vaults, the largest gold custodian in the world, primarily storing foreign reserves on behalf of other nations. That position, built over centuries, is now being challenged, not by a single dramatic event, by a slow, steady, quiet reallocation of trust. This brings us to the question that matters most for anyone watching this as an investor. What does all of this mean for the price of gold? And what does it mean for people who own it or are considering owning it? The arithmetic is straightforward. In 2024, central banks absorbed 1,045 tons of gold, more than 20% of total global gold demand. Annual mine production is approximately 3,600 tons. Recycling adds roughly another 1,200 tons. Total annual supply is therefore around 4,800 tons. Central banks alone are absorbing more than 20% of that supply every single year. When you add investment demand through ETFs, which saw over 700 tons of inflows in 2025 alone, and physical bar and coin demand, which is projected to exceed 1,200 tons annually, the numbers point clearly in one direction. Demand is growing faster than supply can respond. Well, gold mining is not a business that can scale quickly. Building a new mine takes years. Obtaining permits, financing the project, constructing infrastructure, beginning extraction. The timeline from discovery to production is typically a decade or more. Supply cannot respond to a demand surge on a short timeline. Central banks buying at over 1,000 tons per year is not a short-term fluctuation. It is a structural change in the market, and the gold price has reflected that. In 2025, gold surged more than 60%, its strongest annual performance in decades. In January 2026, it hit an all-time high above $5,500 per ounce before pulling back. JP Morgan, whose own research desk covers the gold market closely, is projecting gold to average $5,000 per ounce by the end of 2026. For the individual investor watching this, the central bank story is significant for one reason that goes beyond the price. Central banks are not retail investors. They are not buying gold because they saw a video or read a newsletter. They are the most conservative, most institutionally cautious buyers in the world. They move slowly. They decide on years-long timescales, and 95% of them have publicly stated they plan to buy more. When the institutions that run the global monetary system are accumulating an asset at the fastest pace in 60 years and doing much of it secretly, that is a signal of a different order than anything a chart or a price forecast can tell you. The question of why they are buying is ultimately a question about confidence. Confidence in existing systems, confidence in the dollar. Confidence in the ability to hold assets safely in a world where those assets can be frozen. And the answer from central banks, expressed not in words but in tons, is that confidence is shifting, not collapsing, not disappearing overnight, but shifting. Gradually, steadily, and at an accelerating pace, the institutions that backstop the global financial system are moving toward an asset that has no counterparty, carries no credit risk, and cannot be devalued by any country's economic policy. Gold has served that purpose for 5,000 years, and in 2024 and 2025, the people who manage the world's money decided for the 15th consecutive year to own more of it. That is the investigation. This is Gold Report. Subscribe for weekly gold news, price analysis, and economic investigations every week.